We're kicking off this week with how to get input from the console so that we can use them inside of our program. And we do that through the use of a scanner object. And this video will show you how to create the scanner object and how to use it. This video will show you how to capture that user input and then use it inside of different calculations and such. To get you comfortable working with a scanner, there's a practice exercise using one of the assignments that we created last week with the average age. You can go through that and give that a shot, and then we're going to modify the online book order to add the console to it so that we can capture a total book price and the number of books from the user, and then we'll use those values inside of our calculations. Before we get too deep into using the scanner, I want to jump over to Eclipse and show you a couple of examples. The first time that you get ready to use the scanner, you'll have to import it into your project. So after you add the object in there, you'll see this red X over here, and all you'll have to do is import the scanner object. So import scanner from the Java utility package, and that will add an import line up here to the top of your program. Typically, whenever you get ready to use the scanner, you'll have this little notification here that says this is a resource link because it's never closed. So in order to keep that error from happening, you can go down to the end of your program and you can put in the scan or take the scanner name, which we've called end, and use a method called close, and that will close out the scanner so that it's no longer left open and it's not considered a leaked resource. So if you kind of compare that to leaving a window open whenever your furnace is on, it's the same idea. You're just letting those resources just fly out the window whenever you're not using them. So you'll want to close that scanner whenever you're done using it. Typically it's at the end of your program. Eclipse will put in this import statement for you. Usually it'll go in line 1 or line 2 depending on how your program is set up. So this line is something that you should never have to type. Just let Eclipse put it in there for you. So in this particular example, I'm asking a student what their GPA is, and I'm grabbing the double, storing it into a GPA variable. I'm asking them how many credits. That's going to be an int, so I'm using my next int method to capture the integer stored into credits. Then I'm asking them what their major is, and whenever I'm going to capture that string into a variable called major. And I have two methods that I want to show you, in.next and in.nextLine, so that you can see the difference between the two of them. And once I get this information, all I'm doing is just repeating it out again so that you can see what goes into it. So let me run this. Right now, for the major, for the string, I'm using in.next. And that means that it's going to capture the next character or the next characters until it finds a space. So let me show you what I mean. So if you look down here in our output, you can see that for the major, I typed in comp sci, but for the major it only captured comp. I didn't have any problems with the double or with the integer. So with the in.next, it only captures what it finds until it finds a space. And then how it handles this will depend on what your program does. Sometimes if it's at the end of your program, like it is here, it will just disregard it. If it's in the middle of your program, it may try to capture it and put it into a different variable. So that's in.next. It just grabs a set of characters until it finds a space. So let me show you in.nextLine. Let me uncomment this. We'll save it and we'll run it again. So on this one, you can see that it skipped over what is your major. And instead, it didn't put anything there, didn't even prompt us. So this is a common problem whenever you're hopping between different data types, particularly whenever you've captured a number of some kind and then you're ready to capture a string. So if this happens to you, it's nothing to be concerned. What is being left on the line after this integer is what's called a line break. So down here, it captured the 12, but it did not remove the line break so that it would go on to the next part to capture. So whenever you have you're alternating between ints and doubles and strings, what you have to do is clear that line break. And we don't need to do anything with it, so this is kind of why I showed you that first video there. We can just clear the line with an in.nextLine. Then that will let it pause so that it can get what is your major. Let me run this again. And you can see now it captured the whole piece. It stopped and paused because the line break was originally being captured by major, but because we put this in here, now it's being captured here. Even though we're not storing it into a variable, we've just got it off the line and we're able to use it. So this is a little tricky as you get started. I want to show you one more example too, where I add in, let's add in something right here, where we get the advisor information. Now between GPA, where I capture a double, and credits, where I capture an integer, I'm going to capture a string. I'm going to ask who the advisor is. And I know that after it captures this double, it's just going to grab the number. It's not going to grab the line break afterwards. So if I run this right now, it'll skip over the advisor question. It won't let me type in who my advisor is. It just skips on over to how many credits. So the way to resolve this again, after I capture that double, if I just do an in.next line, it will capture that line break. And then it will stop and wait for me to prompt for who is my advisor. And keep that information, it'll print that information out below. Typically, whenever you're working with strings, because you don't know how many words they're going to put in, usually you'll use an in.next line versus an in.next. So in this case, if my advisor used in.next, I want to show you what happens. So that means it's only going to capture the first word till it finds a space. So now, in.next captured the Kelly, but did not capture the Joe. So whenever it asks how many credit, it actually tries to put in the Joe for how many credits. Well, Joe is a string, but it's waiting to capture an integer. So what you end up with is an exception, an input mismatch exception. So it's expecting an integer, but it received a string and it doesn't know how to handle that. So it throws this exception. And if this happens, this does not necessarily mean that your program is broken. It may mean that you've, like I did here, typed in the wrong type, the wrong data type. Sometimes whenever you're testing, you'll accidentally put doubles in where you need to put integers in. So check your program again, and these are some of the issues that you'll find whenever you work through testing. Let's look back at Blackboard to see what else we have going on this week. We're going to start working with strings next. Strings are considered a class variable, and whenever we work with class variables, oftentimes there are special methods that we can use with them. And methods are just basically recipes that let you do things to the variables to save a little bit of time. So here's a video that kicks off talking about some of those important string variables. Take a look at that just so that you're familiar with it. And we've got a little bit of practice. We're going to create a Mad Lib, and we're going to do some formatting to a string. There are a couple items that I want to point out when working with strings. So let me flip over to Eclipse again. What I wanted to point out when working with strings is how you add them together. So if you look at this particular example, I have an int A, int B, and I'm just saying added together you get. Now once this part right here, added together you get, is a string, and once I add the integer to it, this actually turns the value that's inside of this variable into a string. So once this piece is turned into a string, and then it would add B, and it would turn this into a string. So instead of getting 11, like you would expect, I get 56. And that's because this is a string, so it changes the value inside of A to a string, and then it changes the value of B to a string. So if you want these particular things to actually be added together, you'll have to think about your order of operations again. And you would have to put them inside of a set of parentheses so that the addition happens and they're both treated as integers, and then after the fact they would be changed over to a string whenever it gets added to this print line. Now I want to switch over and explain to you the substring method that you can use whenever you're working with a string. This first example uses a string variable called location that's currently set to the value outside. And the positioning inside of our string actually begins at 0 instead of 1 like we would think, just in normal day-to-day conversation. In Java, this is actually quite common. Whenever we start working with arrays in a couple weeks, we'll find that the first position inside of an array is actually 0 as well. So if I want to use the substring method, I have to call it on a particular variable. So in this case, my variable name is location, dot, and then the method is called substring, and I have to give it a value. So from here, I'm saying I want what's in position 0 all the way up to 3, but it does not include 3. So in this case, it will return out to us. So it would start at 0, grab the O, grab the U, grab the T, and then it would see, oh, this is position 3, so I'm done here. So it cuts it off, and it would store that value into first part. So by using a substring, unless we save it back into the variable name, the variable name of location, we're actually not overriding what's inside of the original variable called location. Look at another one, location.substring 3 to 7. So it's going to start at 3 and go up to 7. Well, there is no 7, but that's okay in this case because it's not going to include 7. It would just go up to 7. So in that value, I would have side. Next, if I use location.substring 3, this is going to start at 3 and it will just go to the end. So even if I don't provide a final value and I just put in a starting value, that means it will go all the way to the end of the string. So I'd also end up with side. I can concatenate these pieces together. So if you look here, I have a new variable called location changed, and I'm taking substring 0 to 3, so 0 up to 3, but not including 3. I'm adding a dash, and then I'm taking location from substring 3 on. So I would end up with out dash side. Some other common string methods are to uppercase. So this would take whatever's inside a first name and take everything to uppercase and store it inside of this first name all caps variable. So I would end up with Mary all in uppercase. Another useful one, to lowercase. So in this case, it takes what's in first name and stores it in the first name lowercase, so I'd end up with Mary. I can also combine these puppies together. So I can take a substring from 0 to 1. So 0 to 1, but doesn't include 1, so I'm just grabbing that in. And I'm taking it to uppercase. And then I'm grabbing first name from 1 on and taking that to lowercase and sticking it all together. So I would end up inside the first name capitalized variable, Mary, with the first letter capitalized and everything else to lowercase. This is a really common used line here to capitalize the first name or the last name because it's flexible. As long as the name is one character long one character long, it'll capture that, make it uppercase, and then take however many characters are left to lowercase. So this wouldn't work good with names like Mary Ann, where we might need to capitalize the A, but there are other ways that we can work around that as well. We could actually look for space to find out if we need to capitalize a second name. So those are some of the common used string methods, the substring, uppercase, and the lowercase. And then I've also showed you 2 examples on how to concatenate or join those 2 back together. You'll get more comfortable working with strings as we go throughout our semester. We'll pop back into our topics. We're going to look at operators. Hopefully this will be pretty straightforward. You worked with some arithmetic last week. This week we're going to work with our different relational operators and the difference between assignment operators. We'll do an example where you compare numbers. So you'll enter 2 doubles, and then depending on if it's equal, if it's greater, if it's less than, the Boolean values will print out here. An important note on these example program runs. It should be one run of your program. So whenever you push that green play button, you would type in 7.9 and 5.7, and this is the result. The next time you hit that green play button, you would enter these numbers and get this result. I am not looking in your programs for all 3 of these program runs. A program run means whenever you click that green button, the values that you put in and what you would get. So I don't want to see the same code copy and pasted 3 times. That's not efficient. A program run is whenever you actually run it. We'll look at string operators too. Because string operators are actually a class variable, we cannot use just the double equal sign. Instead, we have to use an equals method. And down here at the bottom, there's an exercise that you can practice using that dot equals method. Let's go look at topic 4 real quick. Topic 4 is going to show you how to create this J option pane for a way to get user input. This will show you how to create them, the difference between the different types of J option panes, how you can get fancy if you want. And there's a little exercise here where you'll practice creating a J option pane to get a first name and an age from the user, and then you'll change that age, because it will come in as a string, you'll change it to an integer, add 1 to it, and then reply a message back to it. I think you'll enjoy this exercise because it's a different way to get some user input and play around with Java a little bit without using the console. Again, down here in the bottom of our folder, a week 3 survey. Please take a moment and fill that out for me. Of course, you've got a help forum where you can ask any questions. And then a summary of all the things that we've got to accomplish this week. A little bit more than last week, but as we get going and get practicing, we need the extra practice. So having a little bit more to do, there's nothing wrong with that. So that's what we've got going on during week 3. If you have any questions, please let me know or ask it on the discussion forum, and I will see you online.